Hello all, I want to say happy 2022, but I feel like this is probably not the video that is going up first. Actually, I know for a fact that it's not the video that's going up first, but I mean, I've already pretty much said it now. So happy 2022, happy new year. I'm here to wrap up basically all of December's reads and talk to you about kind of what went well, what went wrong. I don't know, I've got a mixed bag of reviews here today. So before we get started, let me tell you what my reading goal end thing was basically. So my goal for oh yes, it's all started again now, isn't it, because it's a new year. My goal for 2021 was to read 100 books, and I'm so happy because I surpassed that. I ended up reading 126 books, which is the most books I've ever read in a year, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, very chuffed about that, really excited about that. I don't know at this moment in time when I will set a proper goal for this year. I don't know really how many books I want to dedicate this year, but I'll let you know when I know myself. So let's crack into the statistical part of the video before we get into the actual reviews. 5 books were fantasy, 2 were non-fiction, memoir or poetry, 2 were historical, 1 was a mystery, thriller or a horror, 1 was aimed at YA, 4 was aimed at middle grade, 6 was aimed at adults, 10 was contemporary, 1 was classic, and I had one that fell into like the other category, which was I described to be metafiction. So that was interesting, I guess you could say. In terms of my sources, 5 were alone, this time being all from the library, 7 were already hauled on the channel, 1 was an owned TBR of 2+ years, 6 were backlist books, so 2 years or older, 5 was a new release from 2020 onwards. In terms of format, 1 was from NetGalley, 2 was from BorrowBox, and 8 was standard physical form. So with that all being said, let's get into the fun stuff. So the first book I don't have to hand because it was a library book and I've already given it back, and that was Bone Music by David Almond, which I gave a 3.5 stars. This was a middle grade kind of fantasy, magical realism sort of vibe. I don't know who published it, I cannot remember. I should put it on the screen. For some reason I didn't write it down, but it released April of this year, but April of 2021, so it was a newer release. So this one, we're following a young girl called Sylvie and her mum who go into like the north basically just to switch off for a little bit. The mum's a painter and she basically wants to get back into arts. It's not her like job that gives her an income or anything like that, but she kind of just wants to absorb herself in that. They're also kind of not necessarily running away, but taking some time out of a difficult relationship that's happening with Sylvie's father. So you can kind of get quite early on that the mum and the dad are having some difficulty in the marriage because the dad works as a photographer, but he goes to like war-stricken places, like really dangerous zones, to get some beautiful photos and some really interesting shots, and that obviously fills the family with fear and worry because they can never get hold of him. They only know really if he's posted something in the paper or whatever, and they're like, okay, it's okay, because they're not really getting good communication via phone, understandably. And you can see from the start that the mum's really struggling with that, actually on the cusp of wanting to leave him, and Sylvie's kind of aware of all these emotions going on, but she's kind of in her own lane. And anyway, we are basically following the main protagonist of Sylvie as she kind of becomes one with nature, and it has a lot of conversation of rewilding not only your environment but yourself, and again, yeah, becoming one with nature. And she meets a boy that lives in the area, and she kind of tries to really immerse herself in the culture of the north and kind of the magic and mystical vibe that's going on around there. So as I say, I gave this one a 3.5 stars. I found it to be really whimsical in the way that it was approaching kind of like an important topic, really, like rewilding, nature, that sort of thing. It added this kind of magical layer to it all. I loved the character of Gabriel, who really reminded me of Lanny from Max Porter's Lanny, and I really enjoyed that. And again, I enjoyed the conversations regarding rewilding ourselves and the nature and like environment and everything like that. I thought it was brought across quite well. But I really struggled with our main character, Sylvia. I felt like she was too aloof, and I get the point for that. Like, it's more of a connection and more of like a reawakening when she gets to that point, but I just didn't gel with her as a character. It annoyed me. I just found her to be rude. I understood she was more shy, but I don't know, I just didn't enjoy reading from that viewpoint. And oftentimes the kids of the area spoke very poetic, and I didn't find it to be very realistic of like 14-15-year-olds to be speaking in that way. I just thought it was a bit too what's the word, I can't remember the word, but it was a bit much, a bit too over the top. But yes, that is Bone Music. Next up, I have another book that I don't own a copy of physically because I read this through NetGalley as a buddy read with Deborah from Hills of Books, and that is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And this one I also gave 3.5 stars. This is historical fiction, kind of got a bit of fantasy element in there and aimed at adults. It is published by Tor and it came out in July of 2021, so another new release. This one is steeped in rich Chinese history, and you're basically following our main character who wants a better destiny for herself. So at the very beginning, it's not really a spoiler, she is orphaned and her only sibling to survive dies as well. And so at the very beginning of the story, both her and her brother has gone to like this what's the word, like this fortune telling person who can predict what their destiny will be. Her brother gets the destiny of becoming something great, and she gets the destiny of nothing. During this time period in China, girls were pretty much worthless. They didn't have anything other than, I guess, marrying and creating children and stuff like that. And this point in time that we're at, the place is destitute. There has been so much war. There are like bandits around. They are living like below poverty. So when her brother dies, she decides, I am going to trick heaven and everyone and even myself, and I'm going to take his identity and claim that destiny of greatness for myself. And it's very interesting. It shows you how much you can go with just desire alone and how much you can shape and change yourself. So yeah, it's very powerful. And obviously there's definitely context of the Chinese history, mythology and lore that I definitely wasn't clued into. I don't know a lot about, so I'm probably definitely someone that has missed a lot of context, but it was interesting. It was very rich in that way. I really liked how well done the time jumps were. I feel like time jumps is something that is kind of one of my pet peeves in a way, because it just feels like, oh no, we're running out of pages, but I want to include this bit, and they skip so much. But this, it felt like we were getting what we needed to get without all the fluff, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like it was lacking in anything. It just did it really well. The era itself is absolutely fascinating. Again, coming from my perspective, I don't know a lot about Chinese history or anything like that, so to me it felt unique and interesting. It makes me want to learn more. I loved that. The characters themselves were absolutely amazing. I particularly loved the interactions with Zhu, who is our main character, and Zhu Da, as well as Zhu and Ma, and all these relationships become, you know, clear what they mean and what they are to each other as the story progresses, which is really interesting. Again, seeing them in the early days to seeing them later on in the story is quite cool to see that like connection grow, as change and develop and become something completely different. My main con, obviously, disregarding the fact that I might have been a bit lost in the historical context, but that's my own fault because I don't know anything about Chinese history, so that's my own fault. I can do research, you know, create more knowledge for myself. But my main issue really was that I thought there was going to be more magic, and again, that might be my own issue. I don't know why I definitely got that vibe, but it just felt like it was going to be more magical based. There are magical moments, but it's not, I wouldn't class it as fantasy, if that makes sense. So there are a little bit of hints that there might be more to come in a possible sequel, so I am hoping that that gets more fleshed out, because I think I would really enjoy it if there was more magic. But that's just me personally, my tastes of reading. Okay, another book I don't have a physical copy of, because this one was also borrowed from the library through BorrowBox, and this one was Afro-European Notes from Black Europe by Johnny Pitts, and I gave this a 4.5 stars. It's non-fiction. I guess you'd say it's for adults, I don't know, because of the like level that it's written at. Published by Penguin back in June 2019, and we're basically following Johnny Pitts, who is kind of like a journal kind of guy who wants to know more about the black identity across Europe. So he travels throughout like different countries in Europe, seeking people with black heritage, black identity, that sort of thing, to kind of get a grasp of how these mesh together. There's conversations of colonialism, of course, conversations of you know, race and prejudice and everything. Like, he goes into depth, I would say. So I felt like for the casual reader this was very accessible. I was thinking it was going to be really academic in tone, and that would have just lost me completely. So I'm glad that it was written in a way that I could easily understand. It was informative as well as engaging. There's photographs speckled throughout it as well, so that really helps to kind of give a tone and an idea of where you're reading from. Generally, it was just really fascinating to get a glimpse of different parts of the black European experience, pretty much. I thought it was fascinating, things that I've never even thought about, like what it's like to be black in this part of the world. And yeah, that was interesting to get into the head of those sort of perspectives that I hadn't experienced living just in Britain all my life. This is a self-funded mission, basically. He did all this off his own back pretty much, so there are some major areas that you know, there's stones left unturned. There's not very much exploration, or any at all, because he was limited with what he could do. So I feel like in some aspects you can really notice that some places weren't as thoroughly looked at as others, or it was glaringly obvious that things were missing, and some topics not discussed. But I feel like if there was a potential for, I don't know, like a follow-up where you could go to perhaps these other places, and maybe get a bit more funding, a bit more backing, and kind of go and explore the places that were missed and talk more about things that weren't involved in this book, it could really kind of round up the experience. So yeah, it's an interesting bit of travel journalism, documentation about race and heritage identity in Europe, which was, yeah, fascinating. It took me a while to get through, but I'm glad I read it. I very much enjoyed it. Okay, so I finally have a physical book to show you guys. I have Jade, Fire and Gold by June C.L. Tan, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is YA fantasy / romance, published by Howdee-haie, and again it released in 2021. This is the Fairy Loot edition. I think it's the Fairy Loot edition. Yeah, it's one of the first, I think it was the first Fairy Loot book that I've read since getting my subscription back in October. So it's got a lot of exclusive stuff. If you want to look more about how it looks underneath and everything, feel free to check out my Fairy Loot unboxing for this book. But anyway, I decided I wanted to participate in the photo challenges and also the read along of this, which is quite fun. So I will read just the synopsis of this because I feel like at this point my brain's getting a little bit fuzzy. But here it is. So, in an empire on the brink of war, Arn is no one with no past and no family. Alton is a lost heir, his future stolen away as a child. When they meet, Alton sees in Arn a path to reclaiming the throne. Arn sees a way to finally unlock her past and understand her lethal magical abilities, but they may have to pay a far deadlier price than either could have imagined. So yeah, it's got fantasy, it's got romance, it's got betrayal, destiny again, so an interesting mixed bag of content, I guess you could say. I thought it had some really great themes in this. It had like that traditional opinion of family honor that was kind of rich in Chinese culture. Betrayal, again, lots of twists and turns that I really enjoyed. Some of them were predictable, some of them I didn't see coming, but all of them were entertaining. Also really liked that the two main characters, Arn and Alton, met quite soon in the story. It really kind of set the tone and got the pace going, but it didn't feel rushed or anything, because that wasn't the main meat, if that makes sense. Like, obviously if you read it you understand a bit more about what I'm trying to say, but it just kind of got there where we needed to get. I don't know, it just got to the point, and I liked that. Fortunately, I did find that there was, of course, an insta love kind of trope. That's one of my biggest tropes. I really despise it, I guess you could say. Sometimes it's done well, most of the time it's not, and I feel like this was one of those times where it just kind of annoyed me. There's also the trope of withholding information that would have saved a lot of aggro and would have got to the point quicker. That was another point in here that really just irritated me. And again, as I briefly mentioned earlier, it is kind of predictable in some occasions, but it was still generally entertaining. So I guess I would be interested in picking up the sequel to this. Maybe not rush to it. If it was in another kind of subscription box, I would definitely read it, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to purchase it for myself, like if I was to see it on the shelves or whatever. But yeah, that was Jade, Fire, Gold. Next up we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. This one I borrowed from BorrowBox through my library service as well, so I read the ebook of it, and this is an adult non-fiction, kind of speculative fiction, I guess you could say, published by Serpent's Tail in December of 2021 in the UK, because I swear I've heard people talk about it from 2020. I don't know, unless I've just accidentally put 2021 and I meant 2020, I don't know. Anyway, this is a very interesting book. We are reading about the author's experience with same-sex domestic violence, and how, not necessarily unseen, but it's almost like this fabricated lie that it doesn't exist, and how she's had to navigate her way, kind of accepting that this is what's happening, investigating other lived experiences of people in same-sex relationships and violence. You know, there's information from the courts, justice systems, and where is the justice, how it took so long and even is still a struggle to get it identified as a recognised domestic violence crime, because a lot of the time people were like, well, there's not a man and a woman in this relationship, so how can it be, which is just ridiculous. But it was interesting to see those kind of statistical points interwoven with her actual experience, and kind of see how everything panned out, like in a historical context, how things maybe grew and developed in time as more things were recognised to be real, not just through the, you know, the heterosexual normative scope. So that was really interesting. And then the way that she writes her lived experience of this abuse is through this really speculative, intricate way, like amazing. I really wish I had a physical copy of this one. This was fabulously explored. It sounds weird to call it storytelling, but that's kind of how it was written in a way. So that entwined with the factual statistical parts were just beautiful, if you can say beautiful for the content that it's talking about. It was such a unique memoir in style. Everything was just well done. Like everything, I'd never read anything like this before, both in terms of what the content was about and the way it was done. I thought that was really unique, really interesting. I don't know how Carmen managed to work out this way of telling her story. Amazing, absolutely amazing. Next up, a book that I was unfortunately disappointed in after kind of hyping myself up about it. That is Pine by Francine Toon. This one was 2.5 out of 5 for me, unfortunately. It's an adult thriller, I guess you could say, published by Black Swan Island back in 2020, so it's a relatively new release. This one, we're kind of set in a remote Scottish area, village, where everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everything, and then one day, so we're following a dad and daughter, and one day they see this woman out in the road, and it's basically creepy. Let me explain it to you. Lauren and her father Niall live alone in the Highlands, in a small village surrounded by the forest. When a woman stumbles onto the road one Halloween night, Niall drives her back to their house. In the morning, she's gone. In a community where daughters rebel and men quietly rage, mysteries like these are not out of the ordinary. Lauren looks for answers in her tarot cards, hoping she might be able to read her father's turbulent mind. Neighbours know more than they let on, but when a local teenager goes missing, it's no longer clear who she can trust. In a place that can feel like the edge of the world, Toon brilliantly captures the wildness of rural childhood and the intensity of small-town claustrophobia, uniting the chill of a modern gothic with the pulse of a thriller. And it didn't incite those emotions in me, unfortunately. I was pretty let down. I've been wanting to read this for the past, since I picked it up, came out in 2020, I've been wanting to read this every kind of wintry, Halloweeny time since then, and I made it kind of my goal to read it before the end of the year, and I did that, and I was underwhelmed. I was just disappointed. Initially I was very intrigued by the kind of witch ghost element that was, I thought, supposed to be very heavily influenced in this story, as well as the mystery surrounding Christine, which is Lauren's mum. And I do think that it captured isolated living really well. Like, it felt eerie and cold and like pretty much like you were on the edge of the world, but also at the same time, going a little bit further in, you've got that village mentality of everybody knowing everybody, their secrets, whisperings, rumours. That kind of like contrast was very interesting to read from. But I just didn't find this to be thrilling in the slightest. The story itself didn't really pick up until near the end, and by then we're like finished, so what's the point? It was just very unsatisfactory. So yeah, I'm not sure if I necessarily pick anything else up by Francine Toon. I do think this is a debut, so I mean, it would be a bit rude to cut ties so soon in this relationship, but we'll see. If anything else comes out that sounds interesting, I might just pick it up from the library or something. But yeah, pretty disappointed in this one, unfortunately. Okay, and then I have an awkwardly sized book to show you guys. So this is Fairies Towers by Brian and Wendy Froud. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. Sorry about the glare, I was trying to tilt it a little bit. This one was published by Abrams, New York in September 2014, and it is awesome. It is amazing, honestly. So it says on the back, fireworks in the morning? What? It says on the back, in Fairies Towers, Brian and Wendy Froud leads readers deep into an enchanted realm where they encounter individual fairies, each with a story to tell. So it reveals many mysteries, wonders and enchantments, and there's no better guides through this world than Brian and Wendy Froud. And these people have helped on like their artwork and sculptures and models were in like Pan's Labyrinth, sorry, and Dark Crystal, that sort of thing. And I am absolutely in awe. Let me show you a little bit of the art because it is absolutely beautiful. So you've got like a main story in here, and then it's got these stories where the paintings, the fairies have told you a little bit about themselves, and then this is sort of like the main story. It's really cool how it's done. Anyway, I'm going to put it down because it's really awkward and heavy to hold. The art itself, as you just saw, was absolutely beautiful, and I think it really added to the storytelling aspect of it. It was just like a beautiful, I can't even call it an addition because I felt like without the story there's no art, and without the art there's no story, so they're just like an equal harmony, you know. It was such a unique way of storytelling. Again, I really want you to read it because I can't even give words justice for what a cool experience this was to read. And again, just absolutely a fantastic experience. Please pick this up. I can't believe I've had this sitting on my shelf for like 4 or 5 years. I don't know, I've just been gazing at it and not wanted to open it, but glad I have. I feel like it's one that I could reread, and I don't do that often. So yeah, absolutely love that book, highly recommend it. Then I have this one. So I've actually started the spin-off series of this, but in December I was missing being in this world and I wanted to pick up something kind of like one of the little extra companion novels, and so I picked up The Land of Stories, The Ultimate Book Hugger's Guide by Chris Colfer. I think I read this in a day. This one is published by Little Brown and Company. It's middle grade fantasy and it was released in 2018, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. So it's basically like the ultimate guide of the world. You have character bios in here, you've got some extra content. I think there's 2 short stories based in the world. Then there's like an interview with the author, there's some early concept art, it's got lots of stuff in here, and I think it was just perfect for fans of the series. So yeah, I loved all the bonus content. It really got me even more excited for my reading of the spin-off series. The first book is A Tale of Magic, and I'm going to be reading that again with Kat from Kat's Reading Corner. We read the original 6 books, or is it 7 books? I can't remember. The original series we read together and really enjoyed. But yeah, I very much enjoyed this, and I'm super stoked to continue on with more books in this world. I have another library book here. I'm really happy that December I've really utilised the library books that I have, which makes me feel happy. So I've got If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. This is a classic adult story published by Penguin Classics back in 1974. So Harlem, the black soul of New York City, in the era of Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles. The narrator of James Baldwin's novel is Tish, 19 and pregnant. Her lover Phony, father of her child, is in jail, accused of rape. Flashbacks from their love affair are woven into the compelling struggle of 2 families to win justice for Phony. To this love story, Baldwin brings a spare and impassioned intensity, charging it with universal resonance and power. So this one I found super impressive, how Baldwin can get into these characters' heads and really become them. They feel so fleshed out, relatable and real. Like they feel like real people. I liked the style of the writing as well. It's not so much a stream of consciousness, but it's very continuous, it flows, but you can tell when the perspective changes. There's no chapters in this either, so that was an interesting realization, because it still felt like it wasn't confusing. It felt, I don't know how to describe it. It worked, I guess. It just worked. And there was definitely an easy back and forth of the narrative. You knew distinct voices. Even though you're mainly reading from Tish's point of view, I'd say you can tell when it's switched up. I did find it not to be as captivating as Giovanni's Room was for me. I absolutely adored that book. And I felt like the ending was kind of unsatisfactory. It just sort of felt rushed and then was done, and I was like, oh, all this build up and we don't even really get to see what happens. It's just bleh. So yeah, a really good story, excellent pacing until the end, where it was kind of let down, I'd say. Okay, second to last book is The Nightmare Before Christmas. This is it's adapted by Marilyn Easton and Sally Morgan, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. This was another one sitting read. I don't know, wanted to pick it up. Recently bought it back in December. Yeah, bought it in December. Wanted to give it a go. Children's fantasy, Studio Press Books is the publisher, and it released in 2020. I love The Nightmare Before Christmas. I love Tim Burton films, and so this was just a given. It's basically the novelisation of the movie. Had great concept art at the back as well, and yeah, just very much enjoyed it. And then really I should have ended there, because unfortunately the last book I read was a 2-star, and it just didn't do it for me. It's another book from the library, and actually another one sit and read, which I was shocked at because it kind of looks a little bit chunky, but the font, like the writing, doesn't touch the edge. It looks like this, and then there's some illustrations kind of dotted in, so it was deceptive at how big the book itself was actually. And this is The Monsters We Deserve by Marcus Sedgwick. This is the one that I described as metafiction, which was kind of interesting to read. I don't think I've read anything like that before, but also this particular one just didn't work for me. Published by Zephyr back in 2018. So the back doesn't really give you much, but basically it's a fraction of, like a portion, of the contents of the story, so I'll read that to you. I am suddenly aware of the space of the house, the air it occupies and which occupies it, of the hanging weight of it high up here at 5,000 feet, and the empty night rising out of the ground as dusk arrives in the mountains and down in the gorge, bringing chasms throat-roaring water into fathomless depths, unseen by mortals and all but the bravest of beasts. while I sit and converse with a woman long dead. Sounds kind of poetic, but we're basically following another isolated kind of setting. You can tell that was sort of my vibe back in December. We're following an author who you could assume is the actual author, who wants to go into like an isolated area and write his book, and you get the impression that he's writing a book based on Mary Shelley and her Frankenstein, and he basically thinks that piece of work is a piece of work, an abomination. It kind of feels like a bashing of everything at first, but he gets then, like, it's almost like a delusion, and he becomes very engrossed with Mary Shelley to the point that he ends up having visitations from her and conversations with her, and it's what's real and what's not, you know what I mean? Especially when you bring in the idea that it's probably the actual author, and he's probably gone through similar experiences, not the fantastical stuff, but the actual writing of the book and the struggles and stuff like that. So that it was very interesting in concept, shall we say, very atmospheric, but I think it felt too ambitious. It even says on the front, an ambitious and original take on the Gothic. I feel like that's a nicer way of saying it. It was very ambitious, but I feel like it was too much so, and maybe not executed in the correct way, if there is a correct way for these sort of things. Yeah, it was definitely too meta for me to appreciate, I think, but again, this is the first time I do believe reading something like this, so I don't know if I've just got to put my feels out a little bit and find something a bit more catered to myself. So as for the favourite book of the month, I'm going to have to say I did have some really good reads, but I think it's going to have to be In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, and that there wraps up my December reading and the end of 2021. Let me know what you read, what your favourite books were of the year, and I shall speak to you in another video soon. Bye! OG boy. Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my seat. Know that they ride.